Gringo, Yankee, alien. All countries have a word for outsider. In Cuba, we're Yumas. It's always hard for foreigners to understand other countries, but here's my attempt to understand Cuba and the legacy of its revolution, even if it's only a simplified version. Cuba was a Spanish colony for centuries. Towards the end of the 19th century, a writer named José Martí became a symbol of leadership for Cuban independence. After the Spanish and American War, Cuba achieved independence in 1902. By the 20th century, the United States began to dominate Cuba. In the 1950s, Cuba was ruled by a dictator named Fulgencio Batista. He was controlled by American businessmen and mobsters, and Cubans wanted to get rid of him. Behind me is the Hotel Nacional, where, in 1946, Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano held a secret meeting of the mob. They invited Frank Sinatra to come perform a concert for them. But when Fidel Castro overthrew Batista in the Revolution of 1959, Cuba replaced one dictator with another. Since then, the Cuban Revolution has been more proof that communism does not work. As a Polish American, I am proud that the Solidarity movement in Poland helped end communism and bring democracy to Eastern Europe. But why does communism continue in Cuba? I met former Solidarity leader and president of Poland Lech Wałęsa in July when I spent 2 weeks as an intern at his institute in Warsaw. Wałęsa told me, "We need to fight to ensure that Cubans have legal rights and freedom." Wałęsa's staff briefed me on the situation in Cuba. I found an educational tour of the country that allowed my father and I to enter legally. The itinerary of our tour was loaded with propaganda about the wonders of Cuba's medical care and high literacy rate, but we also snuck away to meet with regular Cubans and opponents to Castro's regime. I interviewed Berta Soler, the leader of Las Damas de Blancos, the Ladies in White, who protest the imprisonment of political prisoners in Cuba. Every Sunday, the group attends a mass dressed in white, and then holds a march and act of passive resistance.
El pueblo de Cuba es un pueblo que sufre durante más de 50 años de represión del gobierno cubano. Ya no es solo la disidencia interna, sino el pueblo completo. El gobierno de Cuba no le interesa a su pueblo. Lo único que le interesa es reprimir y fortalecer su brazo represivo para poderse mantener en el poder.
Otra cosa me gustaría señalar, y bueno, que el mundo sepa de que las Damas de Blanco, lideradas por Berta, unidas todas, vamos a continuar mientras hayan presos políticos aquí en Cuba, no se respeten los derechos humanos nuestros y el legado de mi madre, Laura Pollán, lo continuaremos la vida entera, hasta que Dios disponga de nosotras. Muchas gracias.
Behind me is a portrait of Che Guevara. The building is the Cuban Ministry of Police. Che Guevara's image is everywhere in Cuba. He's famous for being a revolutionary and a physician, but he was also a killer, responsible for the execution of numerous people who stood in the way of his view of the revolution.
Cuba became a communist country. It was not the blame of the Russians, it was the blame of the United States, because from the very said they are discussing whether Fidel was a communist or not. He has never had any ideology. He had only one ideology, Fidelismo. His ideology is himself.
Lech Wałęsa thinks the Americans want to keep Cuba as a sort of Jurassic Park, a tourist attraction for communism. Here we are in a 1959 Buick, one of tens of thousands of American cars from the 50s still on the road in Havana. Most Cubans are not allowed to have cell phones or access to the internet. One artist made a statement by calling this old typewriter the Cuban Internet. Despite living under a tyrannical regime, Cuban people are jovial and artistic. The music is incredible. and even at a young age, children learn to play music. Clearly, they like that song. At the beginning of the 20th century, Cuba was a major fruit exporter, but communism took away people's incentive to work. Today, Cuba imports 90% of its food. Cubans are issued ration cards for rice, beans, sugar, oil, coffee, and meat. The United States embargo has added to Cuba's hardship. While Cuban cigars are still a valuable commodity, they are illegal in the United States. One of the few sources of income for Cuba is tourism. Unfortunately, the Castro regime has tried to keep most of its people away from tourists. And on some beaches, Cuba resorts to a form of tourism apartheid.
The Playa Estates is a beach outside of Havana, where tourists and locals can mix freely. At many beaches in Cuba, however, locals can only attend if they pay a $10 fee. Almost a month's worth of wages for the average Cuban. At the beach where I go down the Jersey Shore, I can attend for $5, less than an hour's worth of minimum wage.
It's understandable that the Cuban emigres in Miami are so upset with the communist regime in Havana. Castro took away their businesses and homes. He nationalized all of Cuba's industries. Ernest Hemingway had a house in Havana during the 1950s. But after the revolution, Castro took it and Hemingway's boat away from him. Today, Cubans have turned Hemingway's house into a museum, claiming that the writer donated it to Cuba. Before Castro's revolution in 1959, Cuba was being exploited by the United States. Since then, Cuba has been exploited by Castro. Over the years, Castro spent millions of dollars trying to spread his revolution to Africa and Latin America. All the while, Cuba's infrastructure crumbled. The communist system and the US embargo on Cuba have nearly destroyed the country. Many buildings don't have windows or roofs. Even Fidel Castro admitted in an interview in 2010 that the Cuban model doesn't work for us anymore. Forbes magazine says that Castro is worth more than the Queen of England. One estimate said that he had stocked away $900 million. Because there have been more than 638 attempts on his life, Castro has a personal guard of nearly 10,000 soldiers. In the meantime, it is the people of Cuba that suffer because of the embargo and Castro's brutal dictatorship. What happens after Fidel and Raul Castro? Stay tuned.